Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Railway Civil Engineers Association. Thank you for your patience whilst we just got ourselves set up for this evening. This evening we've got an excellent panel discussion on project speed. Project speed is a major area for our industry at the moment, of new ways of working. So I'm sure there's going to be things of interest for all of you here. So we have a panel of speakers who are going to cover a few different themes. And as always, we'll have question and answer session at the end. So look forward to some really good discussions and some good Q&A as well. Just to update you on our forthcoming talks, on the 25th of February, we have a talk from the Office of Road and Rail Regulation on rail regulation and civil engineering. A bit of a niche area, you might say, but it's an interesting one because certainly when I started my career, it was all about the HMRI, and that's moved on. So we're going to have a very interesting talk there on rail regulation and how that affects our projects. 25th of March, we've got a slightly different theme on sustainability, and we're going to be having Network Rail coming to speak to us about measuring and assessing carbon in rail infrastructure and how that can affect us. Obviously, carbon is a key issue for us all at the moment, and it's an ICE objective really is to improve our carbon impact and reduce it on projects. You can book both of these online at ice.org.uk events, just search under transportation. Also, I must apologise to those who signed on last week for our talk on Barking Riverside. I'm sorry, we had some technical issues there. We did work quite hard to arrange these meetings, but not everything went to plan, I'm afraid, and it took us half an hour to get going. So I'm very sorry for the people who missed out on that. There were still 140 people that enjoyed and attended the meeting. We've put the meeting online, the recording of the event, and we've emailed all our members as well to tell them this. So again, if you go to ice.org.uk events, if you look at the historic meetings, you should be able to find that and listen to the Teams broadcast. So I hope that's of interest to you. Just final thing to say on membership of the Railway Civil Engineers Association. We were founded in 1921, been going 100 years, and we basically put on the railway events at the ICE. So if you're a civil engineer and you work in the rail industry, which many of us do, it's the obvious place for you to be. We're, if you like, a subset, affiliated society of the ICE. You can actually pay the subs. They come in once you've joined, it comes in on the same bill as your ICE subs, so you can arguably pay it all in one go, which is what many of us do. With the move to online events, we've massively reduced our fees. We've cut them by 2/3, in fact, to reflect the fact that we're not paying for meeting rooms and so on. So for ordinary members who are chartered engineers, basically, £18.50 a year. Graduate members, £8.75. Retired members £5.50 and student members free. So you're all very welcome. So do click on that link and do get in touch, and we'd be delighted to have some more members. I think without further ado, I'm going to hand over to David Coles, who's going to give a little bit of an introduction, and then shortly after that I'll be handing over to Stuart for the first of our talks. So David, over to you.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. We're just going to wait for the switch. Thanks, everyone. Good evening, all, and welcome to this RCA event. It's great to see so many of you with us, and hopefully it's a very topical subject we're on tonight. The impact of COVID-19 on the economy has obviously been huge, and it's still ongoing. But last June, our Prime Minister, and I'm going to try and share my screen now. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. The Prime Minister announced something called Project Speed, with the aim of cutting down the time it takes to deliver, develop and design, deliver projects, and that, you know, a focus very much on building better, building greener. And as part of that, 4 work streams around planning and legislation, construction reform, capability review, and governance and accountability. And again, part of this was something called the Construction Playbook. You might say, why a playbook? I had to look it up, if I'm honest, because I'd have thought, well, why don't we just call it guidance? and the dictionary definition, if you like, of a playbook is all the pieces and parts that make up your company's go-to approach for getting things done. So I think the important thing is it's about as much about cultural change as it is about processes and procedures. This was launched in December of last year, so it's hot off the press. It does follow on from something called the Outsourcing Playbook, which, as you can hopefully see on the screen, was central government guidance on outsourcing more generally. But I think they felt very much that they wanted to build on that and move towards something specifically for construction that would then support the ambitions of Project Speed. So if I now just switch back. I'm at that point, without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, who is Stuart Calvert, Capital Delivery Director for Wales and Western Region in Network Rail. Stuart's 37 years in the industry, and he joined Network Rail in 2016, initially leading the Digital Railway Early Contractor Involvement Programme, before becoming interim managing director for the overall digital railway programme. And in his current role, he's a member of the Wales and West Regional Executive Leadership and responsible for their capital delivery programme. So without further ado, Stuart, over to you.
Well, good evening, and thanks for the introduction, David. You can't see me, you can see my slides, I think. So we're going to try and double act. So I'll ask for the slides to go forward when they are. So if we can stick on that one, alongside being the Capital Delivery Director for Wales and Western, I recently took on the role as Director of the Centre of Excellence for Capital Delivery for Network Rail as well. And in both those roles, we've been looking very much at how we can improve the delivery of projects. Now, I'll let you into a little secret, actually. We actually came up with the Speed name just slightly before the Prime Minister. And we were looking at how we could deliver projects and felt, and as I'm sure many of you here will, that we could do much, much better in terms of both time and cost. And so we looked at this and we came up with the term Speed, which stood at the time for swift, pragmatic and efficient enhancement delivery. And the objective was really, really simple, which was how can we halve the time and slash the cost of delivering projects? And at the time it was, let's just look at every opportunity. So that started Speed, and we did it by looking at 6 projects. We took 6 projects from around the country and a small group of people looking at what are the things we can do. And it won't surprise you that we identified through looking at these projects, there were some common themes. Working in the railway, number one, track access, the planning of work on the track. Being able to have access is one of those things that causes us to have a long duration. A whole issue about governance and consents, getting through all the approval process was another one. A fourth one was around the standards, the engineering standards we follow, and how they can put sometimes over onerous constraints on us. And the fourth one was our process, and the much loved GRIP process that many of you will be familiar with was where we looked at in process. Because when we were looking at all these things that if we could change them, we could reduce the time and slash the costs, we categorized them in 3 ways. At the top end was legislation. There were some legislative things that we knew if we could change them, we could have an impact. The second category was things where Network Rail and the Department for Transport jointly could make changes that would reduce time through our governance processes and so on. And the third area was things in completely within Network Rail's gift, so our processes, and the GRIP process was one of those. So if I could go on to the next slide, please. What we did with looking at that was we identified those themes, we worked together as a group, and we looked at individual projects and saw how each of those different characteristics could have an impact on project delivery. So six teams around the country, probably only about 20 people involved looking at that at the time. And we looked at all these various things. But the thing I really want to focus on today, if I go to the next slide, was GRIP. because GRIP had been seen as doing exactly as the acronym says, GRIP, putting a real grip and a real rigid way of working on our projects, or that is how it was adopted. So what we didn't want to do was, for obvious and very good sound reasons, lose the control we have of projects and good governance. And of course, GRIP follows many standard industry stage gate approval processes and forces project teams to follow good development practice. The problem was it had become far too much of a process driven, losing creativity in project teams and not reflecting the risk around individual projects. So we said, well, we need to have a look at this and see what we can do. So the team set about looking at everything in GRIP and came up with a new process called PACE. And PACE stands for Project Acceleration in a Controlled Environment. Now, by acceleration, it doesn't mean just bring everything forward. It means shortening the time, which is what we're trying to do. And fundamentally by that, we stuck with all the good practice within GRIP, a stage gate approval process, and just said we need to open up flexibility. We need to give our engineers and our engineering teams and our project teams, get them to unlock the creativity, because we felt fundamentally this is what is absolutely at the heart of the SPEED initiative. We knew we could do things better. We knew it. Our suppliers knew we could do it. And so we, looking at PACE, we said, well, you know, we've got many step and repeat projects. We do not need to go through all the GRIP processes and develop all the products that GRIP dictates. And that is fundamentally what PACE does. It reduces from the 8 stages of GRIP, those of you will be very familiar with that, to 4 stages. And within that, there is flexibility for sponsors and project managers and project teams based on the risk profile of the project to set out which process, which stage gates they'll go through, which products have to be produced. And in a lot of cases, a lot of our projects, we could move right through to single stage development, a single option development early on, because it was obvious what we needed to do. We didn't need to go through that multi-option development. So PACE has done that. It is only a process. It has been written, it has been published. We have been engaged over the last few weeks and months on a huge amount of engagement within Network Rail and with the supply chain. But the reality is, of course, it only gets unlocked by a difference in behaviours, a difference in culture, and a difference in practice, which is what we want to unlock on the back of it. Where do we go from here with PACE? As I say, the standard has been published. It was published at Christmas. It's being adopted on all new projects, all new enhancement projects from now. But we know there are a lot of engineering procedures and other processes that form part of the suite of processes that make up PACE. And we're working through all of those now, looking at how we can make them align with PACE so that we really do unlock all the benefits. We're looking at the possession planning regimes and so on. So PACE is just one bit to unlock. It won't magically turn projects around. That depends on good quality of people. But the intention is it will unlock that creativity. And I think, actually, that's probably all I want to say. I'll be open for Q&A later and see how that fits in with everything else. But if I can hand back to David, that's me. And thanks, Jonathan, for driving the slides for me.
Thanks very much indeed, Stuart. Great to have an introduction from a sort of client perspective on Project Speed. Yeah, I should have mentioned before actually that hopefully the opportunity to ask questions is coming up on the live Q&A chat bar, but I think what we'll try and do is hold questions to the end. So without, sorry Jonathan, what were you going to say?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We've got some questions building up, but yeah, happy to hold them to whenever you want, and we'll publish those and we can run through them later. Great,
thanks. So I'd like then to bring in a consultant's and designer's perspective on Project Speed. and the Construction Playbook. And for that, I'm delighted that we've got Hannah Vickers, who is the Chief Executive of the Association for Consultancy and Engineering, and Tim Chapman, who is Director for Infrastructure Design in Arup. Hannah is a civil engineer by profession, and she's been a member of the Construction Leadership Council, which I should have said before really, has been absolutely instrumental in working on the Construction Playbook. From the very start, government wanted this to be a collaborative piece of work, something that the supply side was thoroughly bought into, and I know the ACE have been a key part of all of that. Tim leads Arup's London-based infrastructure group, a very experienced engineer. You may have seen him talking about, for example, carbon, and I'll maybe come back to that at the end. In 2014, he was elected a Fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, and he currently sits on the Technical Advisory Group for the UK National Infrastructure Commission. So without further ado, I'll hopefully now hand over to Hannah and Tim.
Thank you very much, David. And yeah, I feel slightly cheeky in that we've two of us for the price of one tonight, but then typical consultants, why send one person when two people can do it? So I'm sure that'll amuse all the contractors on the call. Right, so we're going to go at quite a pace because we are going to try and just take up the same amount of time. We've got a tale of two halves. So as consultants, we have got a bit of a view on some of our advisory work. So some of the work that we will do working to advise clients on their procurement strategies, their commercial approaches. And then I'm going to speak a little bit about that kind of advisory work. I'm going to touch on what it will unlock in terms of the consultancy technical services part of the industry. And then Tim is going to give us what I think is a very exciting mini lecture on risk, and also talk through some of the work that we've done to set out a more value-based project process is the best way to describe this. So like I said, everything that I'm going to share with you, I'm happy for these slides to be shared, and it will be in the public domain. So I'm going to go through it quite a rate. I'll just pop my slides up and hopefully, I just want to check you can see that all okay. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about to start with is something called the Value Toolkit. Now this really came in parallel with Project Speed being developed, is probably the best way to describe it. It's something that came out of the construction sector deal, and it's something that has become increasingly relevant because it puts value, and as Stuart was referring to, creativity at the heart of the project development process. And this is something that has been worked up in quite a lot of detail in order to try to help industry develop the capability and clients develop the capability to have more constructive value-based relationships, and in doing so meaning that we can really get the best out of both sides of the relationship. So in terms of what the Value Toolkit does, I'm going to give a bit of an overview, but it's effectively going to produce an enhanced project process that, and it sounds awful, doesn't it? But then you are railway people, perhaps you like a process. Sweeping generalisation there. But it's going to be an enhanced project process that starts to put a bit more structure around some of the parts of the project lifecycle that perhaps get squeezed and you avoid some of that creativity. So it's going to produce this sort of value-based decision-making process as you move through the project. Alongside that, we will be producing the tools that will allow the consultants, the clients and the contractors to actually make better decisions on their projects. And then beneath it, there's a big sort of capability development piece where we're going to be rolling out quite a lot of training. Now, given that we're focusing on Project Speed today, I'm going to focus very much on the client and market approach. So this is the commercial and structural relationship between the clients and the market on a project. I touched on that this was developed through the construction sector deal, so it does mean everything we produce will be open sourced. So anything that you like or dislike from today, you will be able to pick up and use for yourselves. This is all about helping the industry and the clients to be better. So we're in the sort of phase 2 of the development. It will be due out in April. So everything that you see today, everything I refer to, you should be able to pick up and use. And I really would hope that that you are keen to do that following the overview that we're going to give you. So the Construction Playbook, as David referenced, has some sort of flagship key policies. There's 14 of them, and they are policies at a very, very strategic level. So you can see them there. They are quite high level, and obviously there is a bit of a gap when you issue something at a policy level. For example, outcome-based approach. I think, you know, a policy that supports that is very easy to get behind, but actually in practice it's quite difficult to take that ambition into how we actually make decisions and contracts between the client and the market on a project. So what we are aiming to do with this toolkit and the training and the process is to fill that gap between the policy ambitions of the Construction Playbook and our ability to actually be able to deliver in that way on the ground. So if you like, there's a little bit here of us filling in the details, and that's really why it's a toolkit, because you can't take a policy and mandate it all the way down to every project in exactly the same way. So it should give you enough flexibility to be able to tailor your approach, but at the same time making sure you're consistent with the policies. So I'm just going to give a bit of an overview of the approach. Tim is going to major on this a little bit more detail later on. So one of the really important parts is the structure and the decision making, mapping out the structure and the decision making process of how the client and market actually end up with the best relationship. Now that sounds, you know, when you think procurement, you think, God, there's a hell of a lot of process steps already within that. But this, when we looked at it in detail, all of the sort of value add stuff around how do you deal with risk, around who are you as a client, around what is the best split between yourself as a client and the market, bearing in mind the market at the moment has quite a sort of rapid change in terms of its developing capability. So what we ended up doing was actually putting a bit more structure around some of the early phases, spending more time on that, so that the procurement transaction is literally that. It is a transaction. It should be streamlined, it should be quick, it should be simple for both parties, and hopefully cheaper as well. But the idea is you do invest that thinking and that engagement up front before you press the procurement button, because at that point it becomes expensive, you have lawyers and you have a lot of delay. So that's really the premise of what we've been looking at. You'll see the structure here of the process. I'm not going to delve too much into that, other than I want to just point out a couple of really key parts. So the first part is that you inherit the value profile, which I'll touch on in a second. So the idea is you can't really put value at the heart of your decision making process if you don't know what you value. And what I mean by that is, you know, is it net zero? Is it cheapest capital cost? Is it whole life cost? You know, is it embedded carbon? So there is a bit of don't pass go, don't try to buy something if you don't entirely clear on what the outcomes are that you're seeking, because that should be central to how you drive and construct the project going forward. You then have a number of steps that we sort of walk you through, which is effectively self-reflection on yourself as a client, a deeper reflection on risk, but also at that point engagement with the market. Now, before you've even got to deciding on a solution, or if there is a project to be had, this should take place. One of the key policies within the Construction Playbook is this delivery models piece, which is a sort of introduction of a conscious decision by the client to look at what they should be doing versus what the market should be doing. And that is not in terms of contracts, that is not in terms of commercials, that is in terms of who is capable and where does the risk sit. So you take that decision and select yourself a delivery model. Once you've done that and you can describe who is best placed to do what, you then design a commercial strategy that delivers that. But it's very much more driven by you taking a conscious decision than you picking up a contract and assuming that is the best client market split for your particular project and your particular risk profile and your particular value profile. So that's really sort of at the heart of what we've worked through. As a little bit of a sneak peek into one of our tools, so some of the sorts of things that we're producing to help people to apply that process is things like this. So this is our sort of comprehensive map of the value profiles. Now, if anyone on the call has tried to implement the UN SDGs on a project, you'll find that it's actually really quite hard, because there are, you know, 50 or 60 different categories, 50 or 60 different metrics. What we're seeking to do here is to take those and start to kind of categorize them down such that you end up with a manageable level of values that you would then be able to describe and the market would understand without thinking, my goodness, there's 50 odd KPIs, how on earth do I prioritize any of those and structure myself and my supply chain in the way to prioritize them. So that's just a bit of a sneak peek I'll give you a second sneak peek before I hand over to Tim. So this one is a bit of fun. In the Construction Playbook, they did define, we worked between the CLC and the government to define the different delivery models. Now you've got them here. What I'm sharing is a slight sort of tongue-in-cheek take on it, but you will find the 5 delivery models, or the 6, within the Construction Playbook. These are them. So you've got transactional, you've got hands-on leadership, hands-off design, trusted helper, and product mindset. And the idea is they are sort of off-the-shelf divisions of labour between yourself as a client and the market. And what you do is work through that process, land on, if you like, the one of these that is most appropriate, and then look at how you commercialise those relationships. What we've done here, just to make it a little bit more fun for tonight, is to show them as personas. We've gone with comical Greek gods. So I hope you enjoy that. When you circulate these slides, have a go at sort of seeing which of those relates to your client. Can you spot your client? It's a bit of fun, but it was just to bring them to life, because they really are, when you read the descriptions, they really are like, people. You can imagine them, you can imagine the behaviours, you can imagine the culture that sort of sits around the client when they take that particular delivery model. So a little bit of poking fun there. So finally, just before I hand over to Tim, I'm going to just, if you like, take a look more deeply into what does this actually mean for rail, because what I've spoken about so far is project speed, it's commercial strategy, which you would take across a number of sectors. So really, what do we think the opportunities are in rail? And Stuart, you'll be pleased to hear that this does align with what you were saying around pace. So I'm just going to pick out 3 areas where we think actually, if you take a more value-based approach to structuring your relationships and delivering projects, this is what you would get out of the supply chain. So I think there's a real opportunity around bringing in our design skills on the right issues. If we know we're designing for net zero, it's much easier for us to come in at the start of the project knowing that we're designing for net zero than have to come in maybe on a design and build project and try to squeeze net zero, if you like, out of a design that has perhaps done the rounds with a load of stakeholders. Likewise, something that we're seeing advocated by High Speed 2 at the moment is this design integrator. So they've got the design delivery partner. This is actually about bringing together design capability, because it is so important for value delivery, whether that value is you want it cheaper, you want it faster, you want it net zero, you want it so that it creates a lot of jobs. What you really want is the design capability in the centre to be able to make sure that you are getting that value from the detailed design, which will happen out in the packages. So that again is something that we think would sort of materialise, and there's a real opportunity in rail because you're so complex, because there's such complex systems. Bringing that to the centre is of huge benefit. And then lastly, Stuart, this is where we sort of meet in the middle on pace, and you can see it from the Network Rail side, we can see it from the consultancy side. Actually, if you can, if we can build having sort of digital assurance into pace, you'll get a whole new level of sort of efficiencies there, because you can start to do things in a more agile way. You start to cut down some of the linear process, and actually being able to see things in digital form and engage with digital designs as part of the assurance process will again cut out an awful lot of time, which really doesn't add value other than it's an admin exercise. So I'm going to pause there and hand over to Tim. I said 2 for the price of 1. So Tim is going to expand a little bit on the process that I outlined for the projects, and then give us a very mini lecture on risk, which is very much worth hearing. Tim.
Thanks, Hannah. So my name is Tim Ketman from Arab. I'm an infrastructure director, majoring in what we do on zero carbon. So this is just basically 2 slides. The first one is shows a bigger version of the client approach framework that Hannah mentioned earlier on. It's in a huge amount more detail, and I'm not going to explain it in great detail to you, but the critical thing is that the main criticism of things like GRIP or REBA stages or whatever else is all about the definition of the solution, not helping the client and the project team do it right and deliver for success. And so very much echoing the same sort of things that Stuart was talking about earlier on, we tried to look at the various components of this and to make sure that we help client teams set up projects properly for success and make the right decisions on the way through, in parallel with the design team going through the usual design stages and making sure that the solution gets detailed to the same extent. So this is, again, as Hannah was, just like Hannah's work, is very much work in progress from what we're doing. This should all be published in April time by the Construction Innovation Hub as a partner to the Project Speed work. And it looks at a series of what we call swim lanes. So just like in an ordinary swim lane, people swim at various stages, at various speeds, but at the end of the day, hopefully come to the same point. The swim lanes coincide at a series of key decision points, but enable the client approach framework, procurement, risk, value definition, these sort of really critical things to be sort of assessed separately in their own way, in a way that's totally agnostic of the sort of design stage process. You could use this with GRIP or REBA or Highways Agency, or sorry, Highways England stages, or anything else, and will sort of give you the same solution. They come together at a number of sort of Treasury business case stages, like outline business case and final business case. So at those stages, you actually have everything coinciding and all the information coming together. The critical thing, though, a bit like Hannah emphasising the role of the delivery model, is we hope it's going to make procurement an awful lot better, where the client team has thought about risk and value, and procurement doesn't become a problem. It becomes sort of something that's very much coincides with what the aims for the rest of the project. And we don't all blame procurement for why things go wrong, because actually it's a much more rationally thought out process. And especially, as Hannah said, the delivery models, I think, will be a key part of revolutionising this, because they mean the client work out how to deploy the team before they actually work out how to buy them. And the critical thing is making those sort of big decisions right to begin with. Hannah, next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk about a small amount of what we're talking in what we call the new risk method. The critical thing in the new risk method is none of it is actually new. What's new is bringing it all together in one coherent shape. And especially for rail projects, which tend to be very complex, making sure that we deal with risk in a much more sophisticated way. So we're all used to the standard sort of 5x5 risk matrix and various colours, and sometimes some money being assessed to the probabilities and forming what's called a risk pot. And we know that's always not particularly sensible for most complex schemes. The critical thing is, if you're down the left-hand corner of this graph, dealing with the left of the graph on the very left-hand side, dealing with something that's actually simple in terms of politics and simple in terms of technical complexity, then yes, 5x5 works fairly well, and we can manage projects by contingency. But actually, for anything more complex, we have to mitigate very actively. And in all the projects we deal with on a major rail sense, if it's high speed 2, crossrail, we know there's a series of problems, some of which are actually about behavioural complexity, politics, ethics, the sort of people factored complexity you get in projects. And those are termed generally as wicked problems. I won't go into the full etymology of that. And then we've got sort of the technical complexity and the various things that make the things go horribly wrong. And when you get to the very complex problems, those are called messy as a technical term, or actually probably pretty close to the what we call them in the field as well. And then we got the problems that actually incorporate both sets of factors, which are wicked and messy. And for these sort of things, we need to be much more alive to the risks, and we need to actually share them much better. So moving across the table in the right-hand side, the upper right-hand side table, we've looked at sort of a general sort of level of maturity or of sort of project complexity and what the recommended way of dealing with these issues are. So for an ordinary, really, really simple project, and very few rail projects are very simple, but if you were doing, say, a warehouse in the Thames Valley on a site that you know about, the geology is very simple. You're using a kit of parts just like the one next door. Yes, you can probably actually predict that most of the risk can be fairly simple. But as we said before, on sort of complex rail projects, especially ones involving complex new stations, you come into needing a much higher level of risk maturity, where the client is much more risk aware. We treat the risks differently. We're aware of the need for the whole team to be very open. The client is involved and informed. And actually, when we bring value in, we're dealing with probably a much more complex range of risk currencies. It's not just the usual pounds and time, but actually, as an example, if we're delivering a major rail project and promising apprentices and we don't provide them, then the critical thing actually is the town remains deprived. There's a whole lot of educational things that are left hanging. And that's not just a pound issue, that's actually a societal issue, which is much more complex. And then for the very high level complex programs of rail work, we end up with needing to be much more immersed in all processes, active board involvement, and actually full transparency. A lot of the issues when things go wrong are blamed on the fact that the senior people just aren't aware of some of the complexity of what's happening, and standard dashboards often mask it. My final point on this slide is what's called the Scotch egg of risk. And it's jokingly about going back to sort of the Donald Rumsfeld definition of the known knowns and the known unknowns. So the left-hand blob sort of shows the Scotch egg, where you've got the known knowns and the known unknowns. And the idea is that all of the known unknowns become known by investigation on the way through the process. And that's what the middle side shows, that basically the core of the Scotch egg getting bigger and bigger. So this is where the analogy breaks down a little bit. But the real issue on this is, as you do this, the unknown unknowns become into the fore, all the things that you cannot know at the start of a project, and only become discoverable as you actually go through the project. So as you're rapidly trying to expand the core, the Scotch egg is getting bigger and bigger in front of you, and you're finding more and more complex things. And this is one of the reasons why the standard risk spreadsheet doesn't work. We need to be far more dynamic in our assessment of risks and how we actually try and mitigate them. The risk method that we're talking about is vastly more complex than this, a huge amount more detail, but these are just some of the key salient bits I thought were worthwhile bringing forward today. So that's the end of my bit, and so handing over back to you, Jonathan.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Tim. I think we're now ready to move on to Stuart Piercy, who's going to give us a presentation. And then we'll be having Q&A at the end. I can see we've got about 10 questions building up there in the online, so we're looking forward to a few more. So Stuart, if you'd like to share your screen and start off, I'll go on mute again.
Hi, can people see that? I'm also going to really apologise that I don't get to spend the next 15 minutes talking about wicked and messy problems, which genuinely sounds far more interesting than I think I'm going to talk about, but there we go. Right, so hi, Stuart Piercy, and I've been working as part of various teams within Network Rail on 2 Project Speed proposals over the last 6 months or so. It's been a really interesting period that I think is worth talking about from the supply chain perspective. It's forced us to really engage, really think differently, and actually challenge those processes that we've been talked about earlier. Fundamentally, though, many of the challenges are the same, and it's been more about the approach and the order of what you've got to do to try and get there, and just tying that back a little bit. So I think that ties a little bit into what Stuart Calvert talked about with the process. Some bits of the process aren't broken, you still need to use them, and it's how can you use them more efficiently. And I really liked what Hannah talked about in terms of the creativity aspect. It's been really interesting 6 months opening up and being as creative as we possibly can, trying to answer that question, not so much of what can we do for Project Speed, but what can Project Speed do for us. So what have we been up to? Hopefully it kind of says what it should do on the tin, really. It's those things that Stuart talked about earlier of halving the time and slashing the cost, but it's really also about challenging those benefits, getting to the early realization of the benefits, and what are they? Why are we doing these schemes in the first place? Because ultimately you can go and deliver a great scheme in half the time and half the budget, but not deliver a benefit that comes with that. It's also been trying to focus those, particularly in the large enhancements perspective that I've been working on, to deliver the better balance of the investment so that actually it gives you those pounds in the ground. The actual infrastructure on the ground is where the money gets spent, rather than in all the processes that get you there. As a little bit of a narrative back to why does that fit with where we've come from. So often, and I'll be up for some challenge on this, but a lot of the baseline practices that were out there were very much an ends-based approach. Where do I want to end up and why? And okay, as a contractor, obviously I'm likely to challenge that, and how do I get there? But also, even in the way the process works, the establishment and management of the value and the cost is always towards the end of the cycle in various different ways, even if you've got multiple parts to the cycle. And both those things tend to end up starting to squash and squeeze the question, which we've tried to ask of, well, how could you get most of the benefits without spending most of the money? And it rephrases that Project Speed question into a question about benefits rather than a question about time. There's 3 different ways we've kind of looked at it. They're a bit interchangeable. There's probably a degree of, again, they're not necessarily of themselves new, it's the way they've been applied. So I'm not the first person to talk about why, how and what on the internet. There's some interesting videos out there that you can look at, but we've been trying to apply that to the schemes we've been looking at, because I suppose it's one of those intriguing things about being human. We want, how can you use your imagination to get to what it was that you want? And often we get very focused in on the what, and what does this thing tangibly look like? Because if we can't tangibly see it, then, well, we struggle with it sometimes. But actually what it is may not always matter. Is why were you trying to do it in the first place? How can we get into our heart of hearts? How can we as a supply chain get to our client for why they wanted it in the first place? You can come up with two different solutions, but the cheaper one that fitted with the why is likely to be better. The other thing then comes into how do you get there? And obviously as a contractor, I'm always likely to say that, but actually on a wider context, it's not just the buildability of it, it's the order in which you go to get there, and how could you do that? And then that then functions into what you want. And one of the things we probably would likely to say is that a lot of the core cost and value that we can drive out of this should sit in that why area, in that how area, and then the what can then follow. A key example of that might be something around the side of things there, particularly stakeholders, where they drive a lot more whys and why would we want that, and we want this for these reasons, and driving their whys because of the multitude of stakeholders often ends up in an expensive scheme because you've got too many of them. Or the how side of things, so the length of time and the time related cost is obviously a really clear driver, even if the end result, the direct costs of the work, doesn't particularly change. Put some examples up on the why disciplines, how disciplines, and what disciplines, and how do we get those involved. And the key point of that is not so much the disciplines themselves, but actually getting that team to be really focused on what we're trying to do. And then how do we measure that, and how do we procure it? And one of the great things has been that along has come these other documents that allows us to think about that and allows us to do that. It was really interesting seeing the value toolkit back in the summer, and okay, how does that change our methods of thought? But that then actually gives us the basis on which to do it, which gives us some standardization. Another concept to look at and to really think about. So it's important to get your requirements right, and you want things out of this. But actually it's also important to understand those realities, and when do we do that? And often, particularly in a very iterative development process of a scheme, we come to understand them a bit late. And it can then drive either costs in or something happening. And it's important to get those realities right and understand them. I tend to try and look at them as kind of negative requirements. The environment around us is going to force us to have to do certain things, and that is the reality of the situation we look at it. We might want to define requirements, but actually other people get to define them on us. It's then quite useful to try and balance between the two, and I've just picked some here. They don't particularly mean anything in this example, but how do you want to challenge, line speed? We'd really like it to be 100 miles an hour, but actually 90 miles an hour because of some piece of existing infrastructure. Do you want to spend that money? What does that mean, and how does the reality influence what you might get out of a requirement? And doing that as early as you possibly can. The key is the order in which you do the process, because ultimately most schemes go through something like this, but accepting that early on and trying to drive it as early in the process as possible. So that then gets us to having those early assessment of what are the cost-based items, and not just being limited to the end of a process. Try to avoid the repetition that often comes from that, and that then is driven by that much better overview of the factors. The better of the overview you get, the more efficient the design development you're going to get out of it. But finally, and I suppose there's an interesting challenge, is that can start to focus you on an incremental delivery options. Actually, that question at the beginning of how can we get most of what we want, but we don't have to spend most of the money to get there. Can you develop it so that you have it in small chunks or not? I suppose that comes back to one final question that I wanted to ask most people is master planning versus incrementalism. Hopefully most people know what I mean by that, and I'm going to apologise to most of the engineers out there by saying I think we could learn something from architects. What's on the screen at the moment is around the master planning, which is really where do you want to get to, and how can I really maximise my value out of it. And it is important to do that. It is important to get that understanding, and it makes you think about it, and you are always out there to maximise those benefits. What's the most I can get out of that? That's what the master planning is always trying to do from an architectural perspective. But the incrementalism side of things, and there's a lot of really good examples of how can you incrementally get to a greater good, tends to ask the questions around what can I do today? How can I do it easily? And it tends to push back towards that, okay, how can I deliver it? How can I just get on with it? How can I maximise the money that actually gets spent on the infrastructure in the end? Now, ultimately, when it comes down to it, you need a bit of both. It's important to have both because overall, it's not just about doing it quick and simple. Often you don't get the right solution that way. It's not always about waiting and overthinking it. You may well not get the right solution from a value perspective of that. How can we bring together both the master planning aspect and the incrementalism aspect? Break things down, maximise those overall values, and again, something a lot of schemes go through, whether they try to challenge their requirements, challenge their needs, challenge what could we deliver now, but maybe leave something for later. If we know we're going to go through that process, why are we waiting? Why would we not start to try and bring these processes together and actually deliver them at the beginning and start to try and think of them as part of the whole that maximises the value to go with it? These are the kind of 3 or 4 things that we've looked at within the context of that and have actually been quite successful, but I thought I'd put them out there today as a wider market, the wider community, and see what people think of that. That's it from me, and I will hand back to Jonathan and David for the next steps.
Excellent. Stuart, thank you very much indeed. I don't know how we're going to do this as a double act. Jonathan, are you happy for me to carry on for a bit?
Yeah, I certainly am. We've got 18 questions published in the box. Are you able to see those, David?
I am, thank you. But perhaps what we might do actually is take turns at picking some out to ask our teams, because there's some with sort of common themes here. But thank you for some really good questions already being asked. I think I'll probably kick off with a series around, and it's a very good, reasonable challenge. You know, what about other initiatives like Project 13 or the route map, the IPA route map? How do these initiatives fit with those? And I think it's a very fair challenge, because governments are rather fond of launching new initiatives and losing sight of perhaps some of the good work that's been done before. So if I may, I'm going to turn to Hannah, and I wonder if the Construction Leadership Council has talked about this sort of thing. Hannah, you know, how do we not lose sight of some of the good stuff done previously, and you know, is the intention that some of these things should link back to previous initiatives?
Yeah, no, absolutely, David. And yeah, and I can appreciate it. Yeah, when you look at it across the picture, there is you can see how it may not fit together. I feel slightly guilty because actually all of those that you've mentioned are things that I've been involved with. So maybe we just get rid of me out of the industry and it might be a bit simpler. But I mean, I guess because you do have that community of people like the Construction Leadership Council that will work on a number of these, it does help to align them. So very briefly, the route map, I think, is an excellent sort of facilitated process to help clients at a particular point in time assess where they are and then set out a very, you know, bespoke plan. So if you look at the Construction Playbook, that gives the policies that you may want to consider in working with the client to develop that plan. And likewise with the Value Toolkit, I think that is broader because it gives you a framework to work within, but actually you could apply a route map and use some of the tools from the toolkit as part of that exercise. So the route map, to my mind, is a sort of the facilitation process, the process of applying it. On Project 13, so that did predate the Construction Playbook, and it's very clearly one of the delivery models. So if you look at the delivery models that are set out, there is one of them described as, you know, as a sort of alliancing kind of help. I think it's something like helping partner, but effectively that is, you know, Project 13 actually sort of advocated that delivery model and has now, you know, made it in there as one of the choices that has been sort of defined. So I wouldn't think that, although there are more of these things coming out, actually they do converge and overlap. So what's really good now is you've sort of got governments recognising that Project 13 is a suitable delivery model in a certain type of situation. You know, it's not that it's the best choice all of the time. It's that, you know, if you've got a certain set of circumstances, it is the right delivery model for you. So they do start to link up in that way.
Excellent, Hannah. That's really helpful. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to give Jonathan a chance in a second to pick his questions, but I'm intrigued to pick up on something that Stuart Piercy said, which was around this issue of, too often, and dare I say I'm as guilty as anyone, engineers, we love to jump to the what and forget the why and the how. Stuart Calvert, representing the clients and for Network Rail, do you think that this new PACE can address that issue of encouraging the why and the how from your consultants and contractors, your supply chain, before you dive too much into the what?
So, yeah, I've been looking at a lot of the questions there, and the thing with everything we've done, these are just enablers. So PACE in itself is just an enabler, and it's an enabler with a brand, because we want to make clear we are making a difference. We're doing something different. The focus, and going back to what Hannah was just saying in the previous question, to me, all of these things are aligned. They're all aligned about how we can do things more effectively, how we can get the right brains focused on delivering the right solution. And in Network Rail, this all aligns with the Putting Passengers First program as well, because fundamentally, are we delivering projects to tick boxes and meet process requirements and to comply with standards, or are we doing them because we have an objective to meet? And whether it's to deliver a better rail service, a more efficient rail service, to increase capacity, to reduce cost, to give better passenger experience, to give better freight capacity, all of those things, that's the outcome we're trying to achieve. Having PACE or following Project 13 or following the playbook are enablers. What is absolutely crucial is the leadership of that, and the leadership that is focused on the outcome, and the leadership that gives people permission to meet those objectives. That is the real goal out of all of this. And as a client, we have to change to say, and we are changing to say, our focus is how we can achieve this outcome. We then look at things that we put in place that restrict people doing it, whether it's through procurement or engineering standards, and say, actually, you've got some freedom here, but we're a safety critical industry, and there are some things which you don't have a freedom on. Yeah, so that's, I've answered probably about 20 of the different questions all in one go, but none of these things on that, there's no magic bullet. The magic bullet will come from leadership and support and mentoring and guidance, unlocked by all these other things.
Thank you, Stuart. That's I thought that was a very impressive response. I don't know if briefly Tim, representing consultants, wants to just sort of comment on that, and then perhaps Stuart P, as you sort of raised it in your presentation. But Tim.
Thanks, David. I agree with what Stuart was saying. I think there's an awful lot of things coming together now in a really good way. And some of the other questions sort of ask about the Green Book. And again, the reissue of the Green Book, I'm really chuffed with as well, because it fits in with the whole sort of whole life outcome-based approach that we all want to have happen. I mean, being controversial, I don't think that's that much wrong in grip the words in the document. What was the problem was how they got applied, and the fact that there was sort of religious gaps between stages, so the whole momentum of the project and the team got stalled repeatedly. But the words in grip, I think, are one of my favorite set of design guides. It actually had an awful lot of really good points in them about how you actually refine design down very usefully. But I think, talking to Stuart and others, a critical thing is that it was a rebranding. It was actually the fact we want to change behaviour rather than actually change the words. So I applaud PACE. I think some of the questions that have come up have actually about safety and things like that, and clearly in railways, safety always remains absolutely critical. But an awful lot of the reasons why projects were delayed, were so delayed in a railway context, has nothing to do with safety, it's to do with bureaucracy. And therefore, I think the new approach that comes together for all of these documents working together, the playbook, the Green Book, the value toolkit from the CIH, the delivery models. And again, as Hannah said, just to echo, it was trusted helper is the delivery model. Project 13, I think, is excellent, but it tried to be actually all things to everybody. I think this is a development from Project 13, and actually splits up some of the reasons you might want to transform a project, either in terms of sort of the hands-off design, I mean, very, very outcome focused, where you might be happy to build nothing at all. You might actually just tweak the train timetable or do something else. The point about trusted helper, where somebody comes in as the integrator to help the client do things, or the product mindset, because again, especially in the railways, we need to be hugely conscious that we can make an awful lot of savings and be very innovative if we encourage people to produce products. So Network Rail, I think, have been very ahead of the game in terms of the footbridges. It's just a shame that actually they become bespoke on most projects. But the whole sort of philosophy of trying to standardize these standard interventions that we make will make them safer, better, quicker, and everything else. But also the broader value we're trying to find, not just actually delivering on time and on budget, like High Speed 1 boasted about, but actually achieving the much bigger benefits for society, and thinking about those when we start. So is it more sustainable? Is it more resilient? Can it be made in a lower cost way? Going for total infrastructure solutions, again, I hugely applaud.
Thanks, Tim. And Stuart Peed, just a contractor's take on that. Do you see a genuine change happening in the client organizations you deal with, or the client people you deal with, in terms of letting you get on with the how particularly, and to some extent the why, and not being too focused on the what?
No, I do, and I think actually what was really useful in what Tim said there was the use of the word behaviour, and actually I think Stuart was also trying to echo that. A lot of this is about trying to understand that fundamentally we're humans, we're multiple different people bringing in lots of diverse views, but we are fallible, and we often go down the same types of rabbit holes a lot of times. Sometimes don't try to avoid the rabbit hole, except you're going to go down it, and just go on in and bring some of that with you. I don't mean that in a negative way, I mean that in the understanding of the positive. It is, people are a lot more willing to challenge without huge volumes of bureaucracy holding them back.
Great, thanks, Stuart. Jonathan, is there something you want to pick out of the theme of questions we've had posted so far?
So yeah, we've got some good questions. We've got 24, and obviously it's not quite like being in a lecture theatre where you can see people and make sure you don't miss them. So what would actually help us, if people in the audience, if you look at the live Q&A, if there's a question you really like the look of, just click on the thumbs up sign, and then it'll just get our attention a little bit more. We can see the ones that lots of people would like to ask. We'll do our best to answer all of them. I think the one I like the look of, because it's obviously very important to us, is question from Millie, which was how will it be ensured that no corners are cut with respect to safety on the railway in all aspects, construction, maintenance and public use, when pace cuts the costs time spent on projects?
So I probably ought to come in first. I mean, look, safety, there's no question, is absolutely paramount. You know, pace is not about cutting engineering standards, not about cutting suppliers' profitability, and not about cutting safety corners at all. What it is about is it's about coming to the right conclusion soonest. So something I just want to be clear on, I said pace is important from the branding, but it isn't just the branding. It is a different process that will allow rapid development of projects. Now, I would contend that done correctly, that will drive greater safety, because in a lot of cases we have projects that are needed soon that take far too long to deliver. So actually, when you can get to a point where you know clearly what the single option you need to get to, if you can reduce the time and then engage in a creative way to do that, you can enhance safety. So it's certainly not about lowering standards or anything like that. It is about having more effective process. The safety standards, the engineering standards are not under threat.
Thanks, Stuart. I think that's really encouraging to hear. I think it sort of picks up on, you know, some of the other questions that have been asked. One I'd like to pick out, which I think is a you know, a very good question to ask in a railway context, is around systems integration and agile. And let's not kid ourselves. We haven't, as a sector, as an industry, covered ourselves in glory with delivering Crossrail. Just to pick on one, and as I'm sure everyone's aware, a lot of the blame, if you like, for Crossrail's later problems have been laid at the door of a lack of systems integration or a lack of addressing that. So I'm going to give Stuart Calvert a quick break on this one, but I do want him to ask him this question as well, obviously. But Tim, I mean, what do you think? Do you think any of the things we talked about this evening can help on the systems integration front, the agile, project management front, or do we have to look to other ways of addressing that challenge for our projects?
Thanks, David, and I'm very aware of an awful lot of people who've worked very hard on Crossrail and have been done a huge amount to thwart a vast number of risks. And I mean, when we started off on Crossrail, an awful lot of the risks that were very obvious were the civil engineering ones. It was about sort of collapses, it was about settlement, it was about protecting property, and those have actually been solved in an exemplary way. So what Crossrail have done in the early stages was be very, very risk aware, invest in some really expensive kit to make sure that risks didn't happen, mitigated them all excellently, and actually those problems just haven't appeared. So to some extent, it's been a great success story in the first half. Obviously then to come into the second half and to have a number of aspects which have actually ballooned out of proportion and which have become absolutely critical in terms of station integration and wide railway system integration is really disappointing for everybody. It's interesting to try and look at what's happened. I've got no particular insight, but I've obviously read around it. And there was a very good article in London Reconnections that talked about the thermocline of truth, that in a heavily dashboarded industry, it's very easy for the right information not to take a while to percolate to the top, just like the thermocline you get in the ocean. And we talk about that in the risk part of the value toolkit. And the need for project executives to be much more involved and also to be very aware of incentives, because incentives that look very, very good for program might not be quite so good for transparency. So if you're running one of the buttons on a dashboard and everyone around you is green and you see some things deteriorating around you, it takes somebody very brave to effectively act as a whistleblower and to turn your button from green through orange into red. So I think in these very complex programs, the information flows become critical, and giving people proper warning to try and react to things is important. But actually, just come back down to the difficult system integration. And again, I'm sure in hindsight, people would have done things very differently. I mean, TfL bought the trains, Crossrail were building the stations and the systems around them and the tunnels. And the signalling system, and I have no insight at all into what happened there. So again, I don't want to be critical, but clearly it's years late and hundreds of £1 million over budget, and we need to make sure it doesn't happen again. I'm sure HS2 are all over this and are going to make sure the system integration gets sorted, and maybe we discover a whole lot of new problems that actually come up then that arise in HS2. Hopefully not.
Agreed, indeed. So Stuart, thanks, Tim. Stuart Calvert, do you think PACE can address the systems integration challenge in complex railway projects?
Again, it's an enabler. It's down to how our thinking goes. As a client, we've got to develop our client skills far greater than we've maybe used them, and that's one of the things we're addressing. And I'll try and explain what I mean by that. I think as a client, we had focused a lot on construction management of stuff, whether it particularly civil engineering stuff. Very easy to think about the big build, the civil engineering, the track, and all of that sort of thing. And as a client, this whole point, and it does start with putting passengers first, putting freight users first. What's the outcome you're trying to achieve? And then I think in a digital world where we have all sorts of technology that enables us, and I'm going to give a really good, well, I hope you think it's a good example of what we might think is simple, but is actually another digital project. Think of the outcome and start at the end. How do you bring it into service to meet the outcome? And then work back from that. And that's something as a client, we've got to be really, really good at deciding what the outcome is and working back, and then being really clear on how you bring it into service. So thinking about the outcome and working out what does that mean in terms of the system, the railway system, not just systems, but on people, starting with a concept of operations, on the systems, on the rolling stock, on the timetable, and thinking how you bring that all back together. And then there is a bit of construction work you do as well as part of that. And the two examples I'm going to give a highly complex one within Network Rail, where that approach, we're attempting to take that approach, which is the East Coast Digital Programme, where a huge amount of focus has been put on the outcome required and the system thinking right through train operations, timetabling, concept of operations, and all those sort of things. So highly complex, and start with the outcome in mind and have a system thinking approach. Now, it applies on the simple projects. A project I had in my Wales and Western portfolio, which was replacing a footbridge with an accessible footbridge. So simple footbridge becomes a footbridge with lifts. The civil engineering was done brilliantly, the bridge was built, but it never became an access for all bridge until significantly later, because the telecom circuit that connected to the lifts for emergency evacuation hadn't been commissioned. But from a civil engineering point of view, which is where all the focus was, it had been built, but it still didn't fulfill its service. So it can catch you out. It can catch you out on a crossrail. It can catch you out on a simple footbridge. And I think getting that system thinking and thinking what's the end and how you bring it into service will do that. Will pace drive you to do that? It unlocks it. And I'll keep coming back. It unlocks. It's down to behaviours. It's down to leadership. It's down to focus on the outcome you're trying to achieve.
Thanks, Stuart. Good to hear. Jonathan, do you want to pick up the question next?
Yeah, we've got a question from Peter Hansford. Would you say that project speed and pace encourage innovation from suppliers in a way that GRIP failed to do?
Are you coming to me again?
It is to the panel. So,
well, let me say. Shall I start from a client perspective? Yeah, if we ask the right question, absolutely. If we ask the right question, you know, I need to open that railway, I need to build that station, you know, and if we focus on, you know, build to cost, build to time, rather than build to process, build to standard, it can do. But we then need to also align that with the commercial contracts we have, which is where Construction Playbook and other stuff come in. So it absolutely can do if we ask the right question. And probably I should shut up and pass over to the supply chain now.
Well, speaking as a designer, I missed a presentation on pace this morning because I was in a project speed meeting. So any of the designers on the panel, perhaps I'd be interested in some views.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to that, the point around creativity. And if you are, you know, picking up one of the Construction Playbook policies around outcome-based specifications, actually, if you give the designers an outcome and enough space to be creative and enough time to do it, you're going to end up with a much better, much better project at the end of it. So I guess the other interesting challenge on that from a design perspective is if you are then, you know, coming to market and being incentivized on an outcome basis, that hugely encourages innovation, because at the moment we are on a bums on seats model. We are paid to turn up, and to some extent, and I know there is performance management, but to some extent, how well you deliver those outcomes, how well you work with the contractors, how well you work with the client is a little bit arbitrary, as long as you don't really muck it up. So I think what we can see as well is if we take some of the commercial policies and start to actually appoint and properly, you know, financially incentivize our designers on the value, you know, if you can make this design net zero or the closest to net zero you can make this, there will be a, you know, financial reward, a repeat business reward at the end of it, then that hugely brings innovation, because immediately you'll deploy all your super productive, excellent digital technology that perhaps you were a bit reticent to deploy when it meant that you'd have to sort of take 3 people off the job because it sort of replaced them, and therefore your fee would go down. So, you know, I think there's all sorts of really interesting kind of connotations around how this will you know, play out in the supply chain. But outcomes for designers, to my mind, means we get rewarded for the things that we should be doing and the value we should be adding.
Thank you.
John, can I ask you
on that, Tim? Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, can I just add that the delivery model that Hannah spoke about, actually, I also get to the nub of the problem. So Hannah rightly said we're talking about the outcomes and the values we're trying to achieve, but also the how we do it really matters. And the delivery models that are listed, of the 3 transformational ones, we have one that's called product mindset, which is actually about trying to make sure that we encourage the whole industry to be ready to do standard solutions much better. We've got one called hands-off design, which is actually all about the outcome, as I said before, and not about actually building anything. And so a no-build solution might be there. And in a world where we're trying to make everything greener and lower carbon, actually, if we can get more for less or more for better, or not, just don't build things, it's safer and everything else. But there's also one called Trusted Helper, because sometimes a client just wants something built really, really competently, really quickly, and therefore it's not a time for innovation. So I hope very strongly that those 3 new transformational delivery models will allow clients to identify project teams that are right for what they're trying to do. If you want something really innovative and they're going to invest in a long scale, long chain of work, absolutely great. People can invest and be ready to tool up for that. Or if we actually just want competence and speed, that's the other approach.
Okay,
Thanks, Tim.
we've got a lot of questions coming in. David, were there any preferences you had? Or do you want me to...
If I may, I'll jump in, because I think
Yeah.
there's a theme around quite a lot of them, which is a very good question and, you know, quite a very good challenge. But again, I'll quote Peter Hansford again on this one, which is, can we be sure that all government departments and agencies will adopt Project Speed, or will they do their own thing as they've always done? And I'll, as the representative for government, I'll go first, if you like, on this one. But I fully accept that challenge. You know, how many initiatives, and someone mentioned Egan in another question, how many initiatives have we had in construction over the last 30 or even 40 years now, trying to address the ills of low productivity, lack of innovation, race to the bottom in terms of commercial outcomes and so on. So what I would say, I think that's different about Project Speed is it's being absolutely driven from the centre by the Cabinet Office, and we're already as a department in the Department of Transport on to stage 3. There's a huge focus on the departments actually demonstrating that they are adopting this and really grasping the nettle on this one. So admittedly, you know, it is early days, but I think the other difference is this focus on, as has been touched on so many times already in the Q&A, it's the focus on behaviours and culture more than just a rigid application of process. So that, if you like, is my response on behalf of government to that question. I guess perhaps Stuart, and actually, if I may, Stuart, I'll throw in another question that sort of aligns with this, and that was from someone who said, you know, with the way Network Rail is being devolved, but this is very much as presumably a centrally driven process for you, your project speed and pace. How are you going to ensure that's embedded in the routes?
So if I answer the second one first, it's been developed by the regions and routes, and that's how we're doing it. So Speed started off by 5 regions looking at 6 projects and identifying what needed to be done to change, and so it's actually come from the routes and regions to unlock. It was promoted by Rob McIntosh, of course, RMD for Eastern, and supported by teams from across the country. In terms of how do we then make sure it happens, devolution, actually, the other part of that is my role itself, where I am the Capital Delivery Director for Wales and Western, but I'm also now the Director of the Centre of Excellence, and the Centre of Excellence I'm transforming, so it is a supportive body to support delivery in the regions, and we're really mindful of this. It is a big change, so that's how we're doing it. These things will be driven by the regions to meet their results. The earlier question, I talked about when we looked at the things that need to change, classifying them as 3 things, and legislation. You know, there is some stuff we'd love the legislation to change, but how quickly it can be done, don't know. And then there's the stuff where we have to work with departments, with David and others, and you know, and we will work on those things, and there's stuff we can do ourselves. So I think there's a recognition, you you know, we can't make everything change, but if we deliver things better, quicker, more effective, more wise and spending of public money, then people will come with us. And I think you just got to recognise that it won't be an automatic change of everybody in every department on day one. We just have to take people with us.
Thanks, Stuart. Can I perhaps just quickly ask Hannah to comment on that? Do you see this being an easy process for people to adopt and really actually take forward, permanently embed it in the way we work? What's your take on it, perhaps particularly from the Construction Leadership Council?
Yeah, so I've sort of shot myself in the foot with this question slightly, because I said I've been around in a number of these initiatives for quite a number of years, but what that does mean is that we are increasingly learning about what works and what doesn't work. I think that it is we're not going to get it right first time. So what we have, if I reflect on what we have learnt, is that actually it's not going to be one initiative, because there are different scenarios. So we've touched on Project 13 being applicable for certain projects where you want to do a deep alliance and you've got the time and the money to invest in it. So that's not the answer to everything, but it's a really good start. So I think what we've done over time is filled in some of the gaps that we had, and we've learnt a lot more about actually delivering a change programme. So you've got to think Construction Leadership Council, bless them, they're engineers the same as all of us probably. So what I think we've learned by going through that and having these different initiatives is, yes, we need to fill in the gaps with the process, but we can't default to being typical engineers and wanting to stop at the process. Actually, what we need to do here is get the compelling narrative that actually sort of gets the momentum behind the change programme. So if you do this, what is it going to unlock for your business? What is it going to unlock for the government? Which I mean is actually now kind of bearing fruit with things like the Construction Playbook, because government wouldn't invest time in that if it didn't really think there was some benefit for it in publicly committing to some of these policies that perhaps we've been advocating for in Latham and things for years. So I think it is that we've got to have a vision, we've got to get a bit of momentum behind it, and actually the biggest one I think is going to make the single biggest difference is training. We don't train people on this. We spend years and years training to be brilliant technical specialists. I mean, we've got a whole society here of probably some of the cleverest people in the country in railway engineering, who have got to that level of capability because you've been really well trained and you've had experience and you've done CPD and you come to events like this and learn. And I think actually we need to kind of infiltrate that network with some of the softer stuff, some of the stuff around culture, around behaviours, around risk and around commercials that perhaps we don't get trained as much on. And if we can get to a consensus view on that, I mean, if we can build railways, we can definitely do this. It's much simpler. We just haven't trained anybody yet.
Very interesting take on that one. Thank you, Hannah. Jonathan, an area of questions perhaps that you think we've not touched on so far?
We've got a lot of questions, 29, so we'll do our best. Just one I think that might be for you, David, from Tim Kendall. Do these processes, playbook, pace, etc., line up with the recently published revised Treasury Green Book and the potential revisions to WebTag, which I confess I don't know what that is?
Okay, yeah, I'll endeavour to answer that one. For those that aren't aware, the Green Book is all about how you do a business case for a project, guidance from Treasury, and WebTag is the way that I should be able to remember what the acronym is, but it's the it's analysis, basically guidance within the Department for Transport. So when you look at any proposal to open a new or increase the capacity on a new railway line or a new road or whatever, it's how do you monetize that, how do you actually go about assessing what the demand will be, etc., and what the wider benefits will be. And I think it is recognized massively now that there has been far too much focus on pure monetary benefit, and that in reality it becomes a sort of snowball effect. Wealthy areas, economic areas like London appear to well, they do more than appear. They, when you do the analysis in the old way, very clearly come out with much better business cases. But it's hardly surprising because you've got the wealth there. You've got the demand for, well, you used to have before COVID at least, huge commuting demand and so on. So as part of this government's attempt to level up the country, to look at how do we get greater investment in the wider economy, there are changes happening to the Green Book and to things like WebTag to reflect that, such that you are looking at wider economic benefit, or just wider benefit. In fact, how are you changing long-term unemployment patterns? How are you helping the environment? And I think there was another question about sustainability and carbon, and quite right to ask that question, because we've touched a little on it, but it is the third plank of Project Speed, making things greener, making our projects greener, and the idea of the new frameworks and so on, and the value stuff that particularly Hannah and Tim have talked about, is to absolutely enable projects, or the business cases for projects encompass those sorts of things. I don't know if Hannah, you want to come in on that point.
No, just to support, I think, yeah, so the update to the Green Book does give you more scope to to bring that into the decision making. I think the next step is how do you actually play that out then in terms of the commercial relationships and the incentivization. But as you say, I think there are going to be it's going to have to cascade down into things like WebTag.
Thanks, Hannah.
Okay. We've got a lot of questions. It's going to be difficult to cover them all. I can continue trying to pick them out, but feel free to do the same, David, and the panel. I just noticed one that's got a lot of likes, 11 likes. I think we have covered it before, but what training will be given to Network Rail teams to ensure they embrace this approach and not rely on the old ways of doing things?
It looks like it's coming my way again. What we're trying to do, I mean, when you have a major change like this, and it is significant, we know it's going to take time, and we know it is probably more cultural than procedural. So there's a number of things we're doing. The previous question about how do we get the regions to, well, it's the regions that are driving this, and the regions are driving the rollout. So we know that, being quite honest, some people involved in this will not like it at all, being blunt. Small number. A decent number will be desperate because they've been wanting to do stuff like this forever, and they'll be really passionate about it. And an awful lot of people will go with where it's going, and we know that. So what we're doing across all the regions is all the regions are looking at how they embed pace and everything to do with pace into their teams, and how they bring it into reality. And then they're just growing a community of people who take that with them, and we support in that with proper briefings, proper training, proper materials, and so on. So again, what I'm trying to make clear is this is not a centrally imposed, you must do this and then just get on with it. We're growing communities of people across the board who will take this and roll it out through their teams. So, it's recognised, and that's the approach we're taking. And I think that's the most likely to be successful, because it is more about behaviours than the actual procedures, as it were.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Jonathan, I'm conscious of the time. We've only got 5 minutes left. I just wanted to ask, excuse me, it sounds a daft question, Gabriel, who's organised all of this splendidly for us on the technical front. Does the ability to post questions continue after we've sort of finished, or does that shut off strictly at 7 o'clock?
I don't believe that will be recorded on the recording, but I believe we can see them towards the end. We can get a transcript of them.
Super, thank you.
We can
Sorry,
stay
Jonathan,
online, can't we, after 7 p.m?
That's right.
I imagine people will eventually want to get their dinners and things, but
sure,
it's not going to stop suddenly, is it?
Thank you. Because one of the things I was going to suggest, Jonathan, is we're all, still finding our feet very much with this new way of doing lectures and panels and so on. But personally, from my side of the sort of table, if you like, the presentation, I've really enjoyed the Q&A. I think that's been, really brought the whole thing to life. So I would welcome, perhaps not so much questions, although please do continue to ask, but if you've got any observations on what you liked or didn't like so much with this evening's event, please do post those, because that will be invaluable feedback for us for future events like this. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind doing that, that'd be great. The other thing I just wanted to say, before perhaps we might take one or two more questions, but the other thing I wanted to say is that hopefully you've picked up on the links to these documents, like the Construction Playbook, on the various websites. They are, I think, without, I genuinely feel they're very readable documents. Lots of signposting within them, so that do just dip in and out and get a feel for what we've covered tonight, because obviously we have covered a great deal of technical stuff. Perhaps Stuart, in terms of pace, etc., is that available yet on sort of Network Rail public websites?
Yeah, and
for sharing it with
there's a number. Yeah, there's a number of things. I think through RIA, there've already been supplier events and briefing through that. But we have also got a conference, and I can't remember the date. I probably should. This was my opportunity to give a date, wasn't it, for a conference?
It's all right, so I can help you out there. It's the 26th of Feb.
Yeah,
I'm talking to some colleagues who are helping to. It's a joint EFT Network Rail sponsored thing.
It is, and we will have. I think we've got ministerial attendance and Andrew Haynes and others. So there'll be a whole host of those sort of things, and the documents are available as well.
Thanks, Stuart. Jonathan, anything you'd like to add at this stage?
I think it's just one question I'd like to ask really about sustainability. Where does that fit within Project Speed?
Well, I'll pick up on that first, but then I think probably I'll turn to Tim. So absolutely, it is one of the biggest challenges, without question, the planet faces, let alone the UK, and the need to address that is just overwhelming. I think one of the great things about the sector we're in, railways, is that we have the opportunity to do something about transport, almost more than any other form of transport in the UK, about reducing carbon emissions and greenhouse gases. I think my understanding is that the intention is very much that these frameworks should enable procurement, delivery, etc., to pay far more notice to things like reducing embedded carbon, capital carbon in the projects we deliver. But I think I will turn to Tim at this point, because I know that Tim's been heavily involved in the development of PAS 2080, the standard for measuring and managing carbon. And as I say, if you've not seen it before, I do recommend you catch sight of our current ICE president's talk on carbon and what civil engineers need to do about it. But Tim, please, how do you think what we've talked about tonight can support PAS 2080 and everything else on the decarbonisation front?
Thanks, David, and you're absolutely right. First of all, I mean, Project Speed is sort of byline faster, better, greener. So greener is very much part of it. Government, I mean, this year in the UK in November, hopefully if COVID mildly relents or vaccines work better, COP26 is going to be held in Glasgow. And I think that's going to be a huge thing for the UK government. The US are now obviously joined up to the Paris Agreement, and I think John Kerry has said that he views Glasgow COP as probably the last chance to actually make a meaningful difference. So I think we're heading for the Glasgow COP to be probably comparable to Paris in terms of the impact on everything happening. And we expect hugely UK government and UK projects to fit in around that. I think it's also very worthwhile emphasising the importance of rail in all of the various things, because again, talking about broad sustainability or zero carbon or anything to do with what we're doing and trying to thwart climate change, rail must be part of the answer. Yes, we can have electric cars in the future drawing power from a decarbonised grid. We still end up with a congestion problem. Rail is the only way to actually move people around in a bulk way, and it's got the huge co-benefits of actually then encouraging places, and places encourage shopping and communities and everything else to happen. So I think we need to be proud, hugely proud of what rail can and will do in a sustainability context. And PAS 2080 is excellent. Those of you who haven't read it, it's the world's first and only standard for managing whole life carbon infrastructure, and it enables very wise decision making to be made where you actually can invest to save carbon. It's not just all about chopping capital carbon, although we need to do that as well, but actually where we end up with a new rail project like East West Rail or HS2 that should be transformational in terms of what it's doing, then it's there. The value toolkit, again, in the values picks up climate change as one of the critical values, and I'm sure it's one of the most heavily used values. So Hannah emphasised that there's lots and lots of various values out there. It's probably going to come down to a very small number of commonly used metrics. So I know we're overrunning, but I think it actually is written all the way through this, but especially I think the application and the behaviour of government and government agencies through this year are going to be emphasising that aspect very strongly.
Thanks very much, Tim. Just picking up on one very quick question or quick answer I can give. Will TfL be adopting the same approach? Absolutely. TfL, along with Network Rail, Highways England, and various other transport ALBs, they're all part of the DfT's transport infrastructure efficiency strategy. So yeah, very much on board with all of that. At this point, I think I will just say, I'd like to say a huge thank you to the panel members. I really appreciate the time and effort they've put into preparing and then being involved and being put on the spot. And at that point, I think I'll hand back to Jonathan.
Okay, thank you very much, David. And I would just completely echo that. Thank you for the speakers for giving up your time to come and speak to us. A lot of interest here, 231 people attended online. More will be able to see it because it will be recorded, and once we've just checked that with you, we'll publish that via the IC so that people can tune into it and listen to it again if they wish. And a lot of questions, 32 published at the moment. It is quite difficult to get through all the questions on an event like this. Sorry for that, but there's a lot of detail to ask and a lot of good discussion to be had. So I apologise for anyone who asked a question who we weren't able to answer. But we obviously do have those recorded, so I really do thank you for that. Excellent talk, big new area for us. Some of us sometimes are a bit busy with the day job that we don't get much time to think about these new initiatives. But I think for me, the graph of wicked versus messy is a particular high point. I'm going to start using that instead of high hue charts when I've got a lot of things to do. I'm not even sure what to say about the Scotch eggs or the rabbit holes for that matter. But really grateful for the talks. Thank you as well for bearing us with this online technology. I hope that's enabled more people to listen in. Look forward one day to being able to do events in person, but it's not going to be for a while, I'm afraid. But we've got an excellent programme of events and we've got more to come, more varied talks, technical talks, projects, the whole lot. So do join us. Hope to see as many of you as possible on the 25th of February for our talk on rail regulation, which probably follows on a little bit nicely from this. So thank you again, and I wish you all a good night.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. And yeah, let's all go.